So all of a sudden I was 30 years old with like $200 in my savings account, 2 little girls who were in full-time daycare and making, it was like $40,000 a year. It was just a really tough time. And, after all the bills would be paid every month, I had like $30 left. It was, and so it was so humbling to feel like I'm 10 years into like supposed to have this all figured out. And I have no assets to my name. I have 2 little kids. I'm working hard. And it just sort of felt like, I was really in that sort of catalyst moment in life. Like, what am I going to do?
What's going on, everybody? My name is Ryan Snaadt. It rhymes with odd, and you're listening and watching the Rhymes with Odd podcast. Today, we're hopping back in the booth with another amazing guest. We got Beth Shelton in the house. Beth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on today.
Yes, we're going to talk about so much cool stuff. Beth is the CEO of the Girl Scouts of America, Iowa.
Greater Iowa. Greater Iowa, yep.
Almost got it. Perfect. Yep. Which serves, it's not just Iowa, it's other states as well, right?
Yeah, it's about 70 counties, so western 2/3 of Iowa and some portions of Nebraska and South Dakota.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So Beth has an amazing life journey and story. You've also been a speaker and doing some other great things, sharing your experiences with just the ups and downs of life and all the things that have come through. So really excited to jump into this story today and hopefully inspire and motivate some people. So excited to talk.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here too. I appreciate your kind words.
You bet. Yeah, well, we're catching you like the busiest time ever. So Girl Scout cookie campaigns are starting, tomorrow, you said?
Yep.
So appreciate the time. So before we kind of jump into all this, I think it'd be a good time to just introduce yourself. Like I always say, if you're in a really nosy Uber ride and it's like a 30-minute drive, you're like, what do you do? Like, well, what do you usually tell those people?
Yeah. Well, as you said, I work for Girl Scouts, so that's a big part of my life because it's a big job. But I wasn't a Girl Scout growing up, so it's not my whole identity by any means. So I also have 3 kids. I'm a single mom. I'm divorced. I have 3 kids. They're a very wide age span from 19 down to age 7. So I'm really busy mom with active kids. And I, try to maintain a really healthy lifestyle too. So I really prioritize things like my mental well-being. I do a lot of reading. I listen to a lot of podcasts. And then physically, I move my body every day. So I love to work out. I love to get outside. I'm on the pickleball train. I'm on the,
nice.
So I'm loving to play some of that. And I do a lot of kickboxing. So all in all, I would just say, at work, I'm this busy executive lady, and then I really prioritize my mental well-being in my off time. So
sure,
yeah.
No, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah.
And most people don't even say that when they introduce themselves. So it proves how much of an importance it is to like holistic health, like just being like a well-rounded person. So that's great to hear. No, I think it's really cool. And for people that don't understand, like people probably just think Girl Scouts is like just a voluntary club. They didn't know there's like a formalized organization. Like, tell us a little bit about what that looks like, just for people that are probably curious.
Yeah, I didn't know a lot about it until about 9 years ago when I took this role. But just in our sort of jurisdiction here in Greater Iowa, we have about 60 full-time employees and about another 70 part-time seasonal people. We serve about 13,000 members. We have over 200 badges available. Our jurisdiction's about 40,000 square miles. So just trying to get into every single town, every zip code, and bring our programming there. We own or manage 4 different camps. So that alone is a huge undertaking. It's about 1,000 acres of property and facilitating these camp programs. And right, like on and on and on. We have retail shops for all of the Girl Scout stuff. It has things like a Build-A-Bear site in it. So it's just, we have this retail center. We have camp things. We have big things like the cookie program, which, we sell nearly 1.5 million packages of cookies locally. So just the undertaking and infrastructure for that. So yeah, it's definitely, I like to say, it's definitely a full-time job for sure.
Sure. No, yeah. And it's really cool. And again, people don't know what they don't know. So it's interesting to hear the behind the scenes on that. But we'll come back to current day, but I think it'd be helpful to jump kind of into your backstory. Yeah. Definitely a unique backstory and one that's got ups and downs, and we'll talk all about it. But let's start at the very beginning. Like, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? What was your childhood like? And where'd your whole story begin?
Born and raised right here in the heart of Des Moines, Iowa. And, grew up in a very loving family. And as you said, also some challenges. I grew up in a single parent family. My parents were divorced very young. I was, under a year old. So I have an older brother. He's 2 years older. It was he and I, and then my mom. And so we had a lot of economic barriers and, but a very loving household. So I would say those economic barriers certainly played a big impact in my life, and my mom worked full time. And so, of course, everyone was just pulled really lean. But I will say I always felt very supported. I also grew up, I guess, worth noting for people that don't know, I only have one hand.
Oh, sure. If you're listening, sorry.
Yeah.
I should have said that earlier.
No,
sorry.
That's okay. So I was just born without my right hand, and I always felt really supported. I liked to try to do everything my older brother was doing. So, from a young age, my mom was encouraging about me being in dance and then in t-ball. And I would say some of those early experiences, right down to the very first t-ball coach I had, really shaped my outlook on just thinking I could do anything, I could try anything. It wasn't going to be a built-in barrier, and those kind of things. So, so I always had a very active lifestyle from an early age. I really gravitated towards sports. Mm-hmm. And I think something about that, I don't know, that when you can really dive into something and see the difference of the incremental difference of when you really dedicate your time and energy and then see that you're getting better at it. I think from an early age, I was really attracted to that idea and the competition and the camaraderie, every part of it. So my life was really shaped by sports from an early age. And I played sports all through middle school, all through high school, and all through college.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting though, because then you can find your lane in athletics. Because I know we've had some amputees when I was in high school, and
Mm-hmm.
softball, they had one of them had a similar was missing one hand or the top part of the forearm, and the way she could catch, stick the mitt on one side and throw it the same hand, it was like she could move almost faster than the guys with two hands or the girls with two hands. And I'm like, that's crazy. The adaptiveness you can just learn and stuff. Because you played tennis at Simpson, right?
I did, yes.
Okay, so tennis, that's probably a unique sport too, because you can, you got your forehand, your backhand, but you can't switch hands. Right. So it's there's challenges there too, so.
Yeah, I always say, my greatest love for sports was in basketball. And I grew up, I went to a camp at Drake University back when middle school. This is, the early 90s, late 80s maybe. And I was like, oh, Drake's amazing. I'm going to play basketball for Drake. And I spent all of my high school career just focusing on, I'm going to be so good at basketball. And honestly, I was nowhere near good enough to play at Drake. And having one hand, I'm not saying there's no one out there that would be, good enough to play Division I basketball. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's a real barrier to being a great player for me. It affected my rebounding. I certainly wasn't going to be dribbling right-handed very well.
Sure.
So I had that realization, sometime mid-high school, even though I love basketball so much, I'm a much better tennis player, because tennis, if you think about it, besides the serve, there's very little that really affects your game with having one hand. So I had to figure out how to serve. Mm-hmm. And after I figured that out, I was like, okay, this is a level playing field. This is a sport I can, I also love those. I'm really drawn to those activities and those sports that are individuals. I love a good team dynamic too, of course. But on those individual sports, those high accountability, it's just you out there, your mental toughness. The more time you put into it, the better you can get. You don't have so many variables affecting the outcome. And I've always been really drawn to that. So I really liked that about tennis too.
Sure. No, I love it. So did you go to school at in Des Moines proper? Did you go, what school district were you in growing up?
Yeah, it's kind of a smaller district in the heart of Des Moines-Sadell. So it's a public school district, but a little bit smaller. I didn't start playing tennis till I was a freshman in high school. I played with a $10 racket all through high school, so I didn't have lessons, didn't have great equipment, but I had a lot of resilience and a lot of heart. So that got me pretty far.
Sure, sure. What's the biggest lesson or thing you took away from playing sports with your disability? What was the thing that kind of took it with you into adulthood?
Mm-hmm. I would say, first of all, that my self-worth cannot be tied to an outcome on something, because I was outsourcing for many, many years my self-worth to what kind of achievement I could have. And you could relate that to anything beyond sports. But for me, in high school and college, it was related to sports. So what I mean by that is I wanted to be the MVP. I wanted to be first place. I wanted to be the number one player on the team. And that's great. That's aspirational. Goals are wonderful. But when you tie your self-worth to a goal, that's a really dangerous territory, right? The only way to get self-esteem is to do esteemable things and not to, someone can't hand it to you on a plaque or a ribbon or anything like that. So I learned that lesson, because both in times of defeat, when I would not accomplish something, also in times of victory, you would achieve the thing. Okay, yeah, I am the MVP. I'm so great. I got this thing. And you wake up the next morning and you are still the same person with the same problems. It doesn't really change anything. So I think that was a really big life lesson I learned in sports, is not to outsource any self-esteem or self-worth to anything outside of myself. But it's like a journey, right? It's not like I was like, oh yeah, now I got that great lesson and now I know that.
Sure. Yeah, I love it. And I know comparing it to myself, I was a 3-sport athlete in high school and almost played baseball in college at Simpson. And I attribute like a lot of that stuff with just like work ethic. Like there's things that you just learn, you can take with you of like getting up early to work out, like things that most people don't want to do. I don't want to do it. I still did it today. Like you just still do it later. But there's things that like I always, or a lot of people say like sports reveal character, they don't build it. But there is a point in that process where you're like learning, what kind of person do I want to be? Do I want to be that person that, you know, is on the tennis court late at night or doing the extra work to get where you want to be? You know, it's hard. So
yeah, so much so. I always strive to be the MVP in everything. And there were sports I was not the most valuable player in, like basketball. But I was always such a hard worker. To what your point, I would get there early. I would do every off season, workout plus some. I would stay late. I would encourage my teammates. And I got this award at the time. The mascot of my school was the Eagles. And they always, for every sport, every season, the year-end banquet comes, and they had this thing called the Eagle Award. And it was for that student athlete that was really spirited and a good sport and all of that. And over the years, I just got this like giant, accumulation of Eagle Awards. And, like by my senior year, I was starting to feel resentful sometimes. Like, I don't want another Eagle Award. I want to be the MVP. I want to be the best one. I'm sick of this Eagle Award stuff. I didn't say that out loud, but that's how I was feeling, right? I'm sick of being the one that's like nice and hardworking. I want to be good. I want to be accomplished. And a huge life lesson for me now is, I remember asking my basketball coach at the end of my senior year, like, oh, I'm so frustrated. Like, I wanted to be the MVP and I worked so hard and you never took me out of the games. There's nights I would play, every minute. And he said, Beth, you're not the most valuable player in terms of talent. He said, but when you're on the floor, you make the other players better. You work so hard. You're so encouraging. And the rest of the team gets better from that. And now that I think about that, I'm like, oh, as an adult, those are the attributes I value. And as a CEO, those are the attributes I hire for. That's who I want to work with. That's who I want to hire. Those are the vendors I want to work with, are the people that are the Eagle Awards. But it kind of took that bumpy path of feeling, like I wasn't getting where I wanted to be. And so I say that's a really big one.
Sure. No, yeah. I totally get it. Yeah. And that's the not the participation award, but it's like the second best to the MVP. Like, I just want to be the best, but also, and I'm sure you see this in the professional world too. It's like sometimes the A players are the worst people to work with. I think of like a really high performing salesperson.
Sure.
Like, well, I bring in the most revenue for the company, so they get their chest all puffed up and they think they're better and they can drag people through the mud. It's like, yeah, but then if you underperform, then you're really worthless because that's the only thing you could do is produce. And then if you can't produce, like you said, your identity is tied to the outcome. And if your outcome ever suffers, or you're for a really good athlete and you suffer an injury, or you're really wealthy and that's all people care about, and then you lose all your money, it's like, well, who am I?
Yeah.
I know Joey Beach, we've had on. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's a speaker in Ankeny, really good connection of mine. And she always says your net worth doesn't equal your personal worth. So it's like, even if you're in debt up to your eyes, like that doesn't mean you're like a bad person or just where you're at right now. It's your current reality. So it's a fun piece.
Absolutely.
So we'll fast forward to college. You mentioned you went to Drake and then transferred to Simpson. What was that process like?
No, my senior year of high school, I had my heart set on going to Drake and playing basketball. And then, I had the realization pretty much after basketball season. To be fair, I think my scoring average was like 2.2 points per game. So Drake had no business looking at me for basketball, and they did not. So all of that to say, I kind of had to level set, like, okay, what do I want to do? And I knew I was, talented and doing well at tennis. So I really started looking then at smaller colleges and thinking, okay, maybe I can play tennis. And as I was applying to those smaller colleges and starting to talk to some of the coaches, many of them either when they saw that I went to a very small high school, because even though I was the number one player and the MVP in tennis, it was at a very small high school that, didn't always have a winning record, wasn't going to state tournaments. So I didn't have a lot of legitimacy in terms of a college recruit. So sometimes I would get sort of eliminated from that. Or a few college coaches came to watch me play. And once they, my perspective looking back is once they saw that I had one hand, they were like, oh, like, of course they didn't say those words, but it was clear that the recruiting dried up. But the coach from Simpson was really active in being kind to me, talking to me, and said, we'd love to have you come be part of our program. And at the time, I just felt like $1 million. I'm like, okay, there we go. I'm gonna be, I'm gonna go be a college athlete, and that's exactly what I did. Yeah,
Sure. What did you major in when you went to school?
I switched my major a lot. I was all over the place. I started off in pre-med in science and biology. Pretty quickly realized I don't think that's for me at college, and switched it to education. Thought maybe I would be a teacher. Again, pretty quickly realized I don't think that's for me. Kind of bounced around a little bit, and I then landed on religion and philosophy to study and graduate in. So
very cool.
Yeah.
And 4 years? Did you go earlier, later? That you're
right
out
at
4?
Okay. Right at 4.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I know anymore people can come in with prerequisites or college credit from high school, especially in Des Moines. It's like a lot of people that go community college, they've already gotten 2 years done before they even graduate high school. So okay, so you graduate. What was the first job after college for you? You have this religion and philosophy degree.
Yeah.
Anymore, that might be a hard one to get your first job with. So what was yours?
Right. I didn't necessarily think that through when I picked that degree. I was just kind of like, oh, what classes do I like? So then I graduated. My first job was at a rental car agency. I had gone to a career fair and they were recruiting people and said, this is going to be so great, So I took a job there, and it was a really tough job. It was kind of a hardcore sales job. It was long hours. It was 11-hour days every day of the week, wearing a suit and washing cars. It was a kind of a Jill of all trades. And so I worked there for about a year, and it was really tough. And then I saw that Simpson College had an opening for a job in admissions there. And I applied, and I was thrilled to get it. And I was thrilled, to not work in rental cars anymore at that young age of 22. But also I had loved my experience at Simpson so much that I was thrilled to go back and work there. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. And the first job's always like, you just got to get your feet wet. You got to try something. So
yeah, definitely.
So how was that? Like, how old were you when you went back to work there?
Oh, probably 22 or 23, young.
Was it weird, like being just out of college, but then like working for other college students? Because I've had some classmates when I graduated that went, like one of them got their MBA or their master's and then went back and they were like teaching stuff. And I'm like, but you're like 23 or 24, like you're teaching people, you're an authority figure, but you're like 2 years older than them. Was that like for you or not so much?
Not so much. I certainly saw that with some of my colleagues, some of my peers and things. The truth is that all through college and even today, I was really introverted. I was kind of, I don't know if antisocial, but I certainly didn't socialize very much. I kept my head down. I played tennis. I worked hard. I went to class, but I didn't have a large, social group. I didn't have a lot of classmates on campus that would have known me very socially. So even though I lived on campus all 4 years and had a great experience, I kept a pretty tight circle. So when I walked around then as an employee, it wasn't like I was like, high-fiving all my friends who were still students there. So yeah, I kept a pretty tight circle. And so, yeah.
Sure. That's great. So fast forward, we'll go to like probably when you're 30. Mm-hmm. So this is like a very profound point in your life when you're kind of going through life, like a decade after college and working and all that stuff. Let's talk about kind of this like moment when you were stuck, like the moment when was a big profound moment for you in your life.
Yeah. I had, in that 10 years that I worked in higher ed, I had my two daughters who now are 19 and 16. And I had gone back to school and gotten my MBA because I started sort of feeling like, well, if there's going to be a future for me doing something else, I might need something besides a religion degree, So I had kind of put some pieces in place. What I just didn't really see coming, honestly, is how hard life was going to get in so many ways. Sometimes it's, your career's changing. Babies can be really challenging for families. And eventually I went through a divorce. And it was just a really dark time, a really hard divorce, as it is for many people. And so once we got divorced, I became this single mom with little kids. At the time, I was still working in higher ed, which is, in the role I was in was not a highly compensated role. So it's not like, I had a very, very small budget. And I went, 10 years into having a career to all of a sudden, we got divorced right after the housing market had crashed kind of in 2008. So we had to sell our home at that time. So we lost all of our equity just because the market was bad. So all of a sudden I was 30 years old with like $200 in my savings account, 2 little girls who were in full-time daycare and making, it was like $40,000 a year. It was just a really tough time. And, after all the bills would be paid every month, I had like $30 left. It was, and so it was so humbling to feel like I'm 10 years into like supposed to have this all figured out. and I have no assets to my name. I have 2 little kids. I'm working hard. And it just sort of felt like, I was really in that sort of catalyst moment in life. Like, what am I going to do? So I took a few big leaps at the time. I left my job at Simpson, which I had loved. I'd been there for a decade. It's a great place. I think very highly of it. And I loved my time there. And so I left my job there. I moved to Des Moines. I took a job in corporate America. So those were all just a lot of changes, moving my kids, changing daycares, moving jobs. I had just moved houses. So every major thing in my life had changed. And that's just a lot of change for one person. And on top of the financial insecurity can just feel so crippling, So I just kind of started taking some baby steps forward. I think my big epiphany at that time, because I felt like I'd almost lost everything. Everything in life was changing and different. My big epiphany was that because I had gotten so humbled and down to almost nothing, I finally was almost able to surrender to what I needed, which was human connection, like to really be vulnerable. One of the things I have come to realize, I didn't have the words to articulate it at that time, but real vulnerability, is there's mutuality in it. You have need and I have need, and this energy sort of flows back and forth. And I don't think I was great before that at addressing that I have need. I was really good at showing up for other people and being helpful to other people and being empathetic, and I'm a helper. And I thought I could provide value to people. And I wasn't as good about pausing to say, like, real deep connection involves I also need to showcase need. And all of a sudden I had no choice but to showcase need. I was really in over my head in life. And I think that was a real epiphany for me because it enabled me to start really having genuine connection with people. And I think that's when my life really started to change.
Sure. No, It's a super profound time. Did you have anyone there for you to help in that time of need? Or, like, as you mentioned, you were that person for other people. Mm-hmm. Did you have anybody at that time that could help you with that?
Well, when I always had my mom's always been very supportive through that time. And it really helped when I moved to Des Moines, because getting that proximity, back to where she lives, being a single parent is challenging. And having just some kind of support network there became so helpful. My brother also still lives in Des Moines. So all of a sudden I had my sibling and my mom both nearby. And all of it, having a little extra support, not just emotionally, physically, but to help raise your kids. If daycare is closed, somebody's sick and needs to be picked up, that stuff's really hard to do when, we have to think this was 15 years ago. It wasn't as common to have workplace flexibility or remote working. All of a sudden, if you have a barrier with childcare, it wasn't like, oh, I'll just work from home today. That's just not how it worked then,
Sure.
Yeah.
So you find yourself like, upside down in life, trying to dust yourself off. What were some of the things that you did to really just figure out, like, who do I want to be? Who am I? Like, who do I have to be for my kids? Like, what was kind of that? Was there a mental revelation for you, or was it more just like, I just need more money to survive? Like, we got to go figure this out.
Yeah. Well, I think it was all of the above. There's no question that taking a few bold chances is what ended up changing my life. There's so many things now when I look, it was not linear, of course. It was just this scribbly picture if you tried to draw a line. So it wasn't even all just getting better at that moment, but it was willing to take some chances that I probably had been really risk averse before. I'd maybe been comfortable, or I just had this lane in life, like, this is what I do, right? I have a house and a spouse and kids and a job, and we're just kind of plugging along. And it wasn't until it all got, sort of dumped out on the table that I was like, oh, what's this going to look like? So trying out a new career and being willing to accept the job for what it was. The first job I took when I left Simpson, it wasn't a long-term great fit for me. I learned a few things, but being willing after about a year there to say, like, I think I'm ready to look for something else. That was also a bold choice. Nobody wants to sort of feel like you're hopping around at different jobs.
Especially that time.
Yeah.
Now it's pretty common to job hop like 3-4 times in your 20s. But when you're 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it's like, oh, this resume, like, there's like 3 pages to this resume and you're only in your 20s. Like, what the heck's going on,
Yeah. I kind of organically learned at that time, and I didn't really have the words that, the ability to see it until it's in retrospect, to not get so married to an outcome or feel like you need to know the path, but just be really okay with where it's at right now. So, make the very best decision you can with the information you have, and then be at peace with doing that. So in terms of, it could feel so stressful to take a new job. Like, what if this and what if that? What if I don't like it? What if I'm not good at it? What if the culture's bad? What if, okay, maybe make the best decision you can, make the very best of the situation when you're there. And if it's not a great fit, then you'll make a different choice when you have different information, And so I was kind of like sort of stumbling along, figuring that out in that next chapter of my life, making some decisions, being more willing to try things, mostly because I had to try some different things to kind of forge ahead in life. But that was the first time I'd really started to take some of those kind of chances and be a little bit more accepting of what is rather than how I thought it should look.
Sure.
Yeah.
Was there any character changes you had to make, or did you have to become a new and evolved person, not a new person, but a new and improved person to handle some of these challenges that were coming up? Or was this something that you already had kind of inside you just didn't know was there?
I think I always had a lot of resilience and a lot of, okay, like that being the case, what are we going to do to figure this out? But I think I hadn't really done that alone because I was married young. I was married right out of college. And so you really learn a lot about yourself when you're alone. You learn what you're capable of. And I certainly stretched my limits in that. All of a sudden, like, hey, guess who's doing all the mowing, all the snow removal, all the grocery shopping, all the, like, whatever there is that has to do with domestic life, inside, outside, interior, exterior, I'm the person all of a sudden. And I didn't necessarily know that. And some of that was new, even though I was like, oh, I'm a woman, hear me roar, I can do anything. I'm like, but can I start a lawnmower? Can I do anything? I don't know. So I had to kind of learn some of those things along the way for sure.
Sure. No,
Yeah.
That's great. That's great. So we kind of go through your career. At what point did you get to the point where you were able to get into like a CEO type of role? Like how long did that take, and what was your path to get to that point in your career?
Yeah. From the time I left Simpson, it was still another 6 or 8 years ahead before I would really land in a role like that. And I would say what happened in between is that I took a job at another nonprofit and I started doing some fundraising. And even though it wasn't my forever role and I was there 4 or 5 years, what I did is I'm like, I'm going to do this thing really well. And I had some really great results, and I kept really great data. I love data. I love charts. So I kept track of everything for those 4 or 5 years. And when it came time for me to say, like, I think I'm ready to look at my next chapter. And I was then in my late 30s. And had, quite a bit of good life experience under my belt, had my master's degree, but still hadn't really broken through. I was still in a very sort of middle level, kind of income, middle level kind of job. I started sort of actively looking, and I can only say I got really fortunate. There's no question. There was a lot of luck involved in the role I landed in. I started looking at leadership roles, and somebody sent me the job at Girl Scouts. And my first reaction was, I'm not qualified to do that. I don't know if I was qualified to do it, but I certainly didn't think I was. And then kind of, I looked at the job description further. I'm like, well, technically, maybe I am qualified. I think I'll go ahead and apply. It was a very long process with an outside search firm, several interviews and in person and taking tests and all sorts of things. And after several months, fortunately, I made the cut and I got the job offer. But I definitely would say they took a real chance on me. They saw promise in me more than they saw a sort of established criteria of what you would think a CEO would look like in that role. So in that way, I can only say they really took a chance, and I feel very lucky. So it wasn't like a really well thought out blueprint of like, here's how to be a CEO. What I would say that I had done a good job of over the years is keeping really good records, really good data of the things I had done well. Any job I had, I worked hard and I took it serious. Even if I didn't like it, I don't care if it was renting cars, whatever the job was, I really tried to show up as the best version of myself that I could. And I think in retrospect, that's really important. One of the funny things about life, especially, in communities of this size, you truly never know when people are going to come back around in your life in a different role, in a different way. And it's just a really great idea if they leave with a good impression of you. And how many times have you worked with someone, been on a team with someone, been on a board with someone, and then maybe 2 or 3 years later, their name pops up for an opportunity, and you immediately think, like, what was my perspective of how they behaved? Were they a hard worker? Did they show up? Did they treat people well? And luckily, I had really shown up and done a really good job in those lanes previously in my life, not to get somewhere, not to get an end result, just a way of being. And I think that more than anything kind of helped me out later in life. It's sort of that old adage of, your reputation is when people will defend you, when you're not in the room, right? The what they think about you when you're not there. And I think that's something everyone can control to a degree.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I know even, and especially in this role, it's like, it's such a different, it's not just leadership. It's not just who has the resume. It's, you have to inspire the next generation of young girls and facilitate that skill building, characteristic building, personality building, confidence, all the things that come with, and it's like, that's a huge responsibility. But did they want somebody that's just a good suit and tie person that's like, they got the credentials, but they're terrible with that other part that is kind of like the whole vision of the organization, right? So,
right. I think what they must have wanted and what I brought to the table is like the Ted Lasso effect, right? Like they were looking, I was kind of like the underdog who didn't quite fit the mold of what maybe this used to look like or what it looks like at other organizations. A little bit unorthodox. I would say a hallmark of my leadership style that I wouldn't have even known how to describe, because I really hadn't managed big teams or anything up until that point, is getting my ego out of the way. I knew that I felt lucky to be there. I felt grateful to be in that seat. And I try to say that every day still. And certainly when I took the job, I didn't come in sort of thinking like, I need to prove myself. I came in like, you all know everything more than I do. Help me learn. What can I do to help you? And it just became sort of a hallmark then of our culture of, how do I get out of the way and empower other people? And I think that can be a little bit hard to find in leadership. And I understand why. Leadership's challenging and we're all doing the best we can. But it's amazing how responsive people can be when you get your ego out of the way and how much everyone can shine.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. That's great. I know in terms of like the role, how long have you been in the role? And then I would say like, what has been the biggest challenge for you or the biggest growth point that you had to really like, I got to do some more reading on this or got to seek some mentorship. Like, what was that like for you?
Yeah. I just celebrated my 9th anniversary, which has gone so fast. I would say the most challenging thing on year 1 and on year 9 is that human beings are so complex and I am so complex. And leadership doesn't look one way. There's not one way to do it. There's not one way to motivate people and empower people and hold people accountable and to love people. And there's a million ways to do it for a million different personalities. And as soon as you think you figure it out for someone, not only might that staff role turn over and change, or the human being in that role might change. And I have changed. The very type of leader I am, the way I show up at work is entirely different than it was 9 years ago, because of all of the things we carry in our life backpacks. And that's true for every other person that I work with. So the great challenge is it takes so much investment of time and emotion and energy to really care about people and try to lead people. If you want to lead people with true heart, it takes a lot of capacity, and it's challenging in leadership that there's no real playbook to do it. And you're always over capacity. There's always this challenge of, do I spend time on this really important operational thing, or do I pivot and spend time on this really important human thing? And they're all important. And it was challenging then, and it's challenging now.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard to, again, like you said, juggle the priorities, because there's operational things that have to be done, like payroll has to be done, or you have to meet with investors or whoever, like whatever has to happen.
Yeah. But
also, if you don't why is someone underperforming in their job? And 90% of the time it's something personal, like they're going through something at home and you don't know because you're not connected with them enough. But I feel like that's like the superpower for a lot of these really successful companies, is that they can just like have an open door conversation of like you said, I'm having some childcare issues. I need to work from home.
Yeah.
Can we be flexible? Like, yeah, that's fine. Like dealing with that rather than to be like, just get your work done and stop asking for things. It's like you kind of get resentment from your employees and everything too. So
yeah, I think sort of the brand or the hallmark, I would say now, of the kind of culture we've built is that people can show up fully human. You don't have to strip off your humanity when you walk in the doors as an employee. And to me, that's really important, because we all carry such heavy things with us at different times in life. And the expectation that people need to walk in the doors and all of a sudden have it all together, perform at a 10, or, be able to manage all of the things we need them to manage. it's going to be bumpy. It's going to be up and down. People are going to have good days and bad days. They might have good months and bad months. And I really try to help create a culture where that we love on people and we help give them a space to feel like they can thrive. But this expectation is not that they're not human, Like,
Sure.
what if we could create a world and a workplace where like it's okay to be human and it's okay to be like some days you're mediocre and like okay,
Sure, yeah, and I think it's a big piece too, and a big part of the show is like pulling back the veil of like success or when people reach certain pinnacles in life and everything. And I think it is a big piece, like you're saying, it's not everybody has it figured out, or people that are at the top of their game, they struggle with stuff too. Because I know you mentioned this big turning point when you're 30 with your divorce and kind of like the low point for you. And you had one more recently, which is, I think, a piece that should probably be told because most people think, oh, the last 9 years have been sunshine and rainbows. Like there's got to, I mean, you land the job and everyone thinks again, like you got your Eagle Award, like you got the MVP thing, but now it's like, but now you got to perform even more. It's like, this is just the beginning, So what was that low point like for you, and what were kind of the things that led up to that in that time for you?
Yeah, that's. I'm glad you brought that up because that tough chapter we talked about, I didn't know at that time that I was nowhere near facing the hardest chapter of my life yet. That was still to come. So you're right. Like things kind of progressed and things were going good and career starting to kind of take off. Get this amazing job that I love. I got remarried then later in life and I welcomed this beautiful baby boy. So it's just like on paper. We're just killing it, right? Like you said, MVP all the way. We just put our little family MVP trophy there. Just the picture perfect of everything. And again, people are complex and life is hard. And I would say, if I could summarize it, by 2020, it was definitely in the hardest season of life I had ever been in for just a wide variety of the perfect storm of reasons. So there's no question the pandemic was very challenging. I had already been on this path of some pretty big relationship difficulties and had started to navigate some things with marriage counseling and things right before the pandemic started. And I like to say now, like if you're already struggling in a relationship, you know what does not make it better is locking two people in the same house who can't get away from each other and can't get help from the outside.
That's like a perfect mixture of not a good situation,
right? Yeah. So that with that challenge on top of all of a sudden 3 kids at home, not going to school, which was so challenging, all while trying to lead an organization through unprecedented times, through, real crisis. And so just shouldering all of that at once really created this perfect storm. And something I've talked, openly about, it really felt like, by March of 2020, I was at the end of my rope. Within a month or two, I was having conversations with my therapist saying, how can I take my own life without hurting my kids? And that is the level of sort of desperation and alone that I felt in all of that, kind of shouldering all that hard stuff. It's worth noting that at this time also I had dramatically started to increase my alcohol consumption. And I'm one of those people that I would have said, I don't have a problem. I never had a problem with alcohol. I was a social drinker, maybe once or twice a month. And as that heaviness of life increased, my alcohol consumption increased. And it was like one of those sort of quiet things happening behind the scenes. And it wasn't overt and I wasn't loud and I wasn't, like getting out in trouble and partying and things, but the quiet nature of how frequently I was drinking and earlier I was drinking and the focus of what brought me joy in life got narrower and narrower and narrower. And pretty soon every day I was thinking about like, just how could I soften the edges of my life a little bit? Those weren't the conscious words I was using, but that's what I was doing. How could I just soften this experience a little bit to make it tolerable, to get through this hard stuff? So all of that combined put me in a state that wasn't very healthy. And what my therapist said to me is, let's work on creating a life you don't want to escape from. And that was the middle of 2020. And that was probably like the biggest moment in my life of, okay, I really need to course correct. I really need to make choices for my well-being, for my physical health, for my mental health, for my kids. And whatever those look like, I need to be really intentional about it. And that really started the path to get me to this person I am today, 5 years later, that feels like the happiest, healthiest version of a human I have ever been. But it started from what I would say is a rock bottom.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy. Like as people are listening, like, again, like you said, you've reached the top, but there's so much that goes on behind closed doors and just people struggling with things that on the outside things look great, and it's a very real human experience to struggle with things every day and get seasons of life where it just keeps coming, and people always say the bad things come in threes, just keep,
Right.
but then especially during COVID, a lot of people just, it's like, when is this going to end? There's just all this uncertainty of is this forever? Is this for 6 months, 3 years? We don't know how long it's going to be, all those things too. When you're kind of at that lowest point, what were some of the things that you kind of had to rewire your brain a little bit to think differently? We talked about this with your first kind of hardship series, but when the second one came, what did you have to change about Beth to get over this hump that you didn't have before?
Yeah. Well, a couple things. For me, removing alcohol from my life became a priority, and it was not easy. They say, I've heard the saying that, addiction is really the opposite of connection, that it's when you don't have connection with others, is when sort of a breeding ground for addiction to thrive. And I would say that feels really true for me in my experience. And so, but a connection isn't just about, of course, during the pandemic, that's very challenging to have connection with people, but it wasn't impossible. Some people thrived in that. I would say what was different for me is that to have connection, you have to be able to have, again, that genuine reciprocity with another human being. And what I came to realize is I had something in myself that I had such contempt for something in myself that I couldn't allow another person to fully see me, whether a friend or a colleague. And so I had to really, with my therapist, start to really work on what was it? What is it about this experience or where I'm at in my life? I had to heal sort of that inner part, that inner wound, in order to really find sort of true contentment and the ability to connect with others. Because sobriety isn't just about removing alcohol from your life. That is the surface level thing that's the outcome that we see, but it's about healing the need to numb our lives, right? And how do you heal that? Figure that part out is the hard work. So it took a while. I tried 17 times in 2020 to quit drinking, to take alcohol out of my life. And I think because from the outside, my life wasn't burning down, it was easier to justify. There's not a clear line with drinking that is okay, now you have a problem. I mean, for some people, clearly, if their lives are burning down, maybe they're getting in trouble with the law or losing their jobs, feels like those are indicators that you might have a problem. But if that's not happening, you have all these shades of gray, or other people might be you don't look like you have a problem. I didn't necessarily look like a person who had a problem, but I was drinking 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. And so it's really hard to hold yourself accountable when maybe the world isn't saying, hey, you need to hold yourself accountable on this, And so I had a really hard time sticking to that. I'd maybe have 4 dry days or 14 dry days or 18 dry days or 3 dry days. And then I would have to start that counter over and I'd get in that shame spiral. So it wasn't this I'm going to be sober. Oh, and now I'm sober. That was so great. And it was challenging for a couple of reasons, because there were so many times in my life where I felt hey, you know what I have? I have a lot of willpower. I have the ability to show up early to practice, do the off-season workouts, all that stuff we talked about with sports. If I'm just dedicated enough, I will get the outcome. And that's not the experience I had with trying to remove alcohol from my life. I tried, and I'm oh, I have great willpower and I have so much resilience. Why can't I just willpower my way through this thing? And that was a really bumpy path for me, because I hadn't really experienced that with a lot of other things in life, Mm-hmm. And then it's far deeper than just willpower. So that was a big part of it, was removing alcohol from my life and the path to get there. I also had to learn stark acceptance of what is. And what I mean by that is I have a really dear friend who had a really similar experience that I had during the pandemic. She has 4 kids. She was home with them. She was working full time, and yet she was thriving. I mean, she told me one day, this is one of the best things that ever happened to our family. We're spending more time together. My spouse and I have more time together.
Meanwhile, you're your house is burning down. You're drinking.
Apart. What is the difference between she and I? On the outside, we both look pretty similar. What is happening? And I was resisting what is. I was resisting that. I felt so much angst about trying to take care of kids while I was working, or so much angst about going through a divorce, again, which I had a lot of shame about. And it's so painful and difficult, all this change. And I had all these things that I was resisting, instead of taking a breath and being my favorite line now is, that being the case, how shall I proceed? Rather than sort of getting stuck on but it's so unfair, or it's so hard, or I'm so mad, or maybe it is hard. Maybe it is unfair. Okay. That being the case, how shall I proceed?
Mm-hmm.
And so like that utter acceptance has really helped give me so much contentment instead of sort of fighting hard things in life. If I don't have the ability to change them, accept it and figure out what the next best choice is. And I think I had to learn that through the really hard time of 2020 and 2021.
No, I love that you say that. I just had a conversation this morning. I call it a gym date with a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
My buddy of mine will go work out and talk business and life and stuff. And he was talking about this too, like this contentment of setting goals in life, but like being happy, like right where your feet are.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much of that where a lot of people just set these goals and they fixate on it so much they just completely forget where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any moments of that leading up to it where you're just trying to keep the balls in the air when you're juggling so much that you're kind of like losing sight of what was important? Or was that your experience, or was it something different?
Yeah, that was definitely my experience. I was juggling so much. I think the pandemic ended up forcing me to evaluate things I didn't want to evaluate. And I didn't think I needed to evaluate because like the machine was cruising along pretty good, the machine of my life, right? But so for instance, I was getting a lot of external accolades. I was doing a lot of public speaking. It had just taken off like a rocket ship in 2019. In January of 2020, the Des Moines Register had done a piece called like the 15 people you need to know. And I was on the front page of the Des Moines Register, like this full cover picture. And, at any other time in life, I would feel like, wow, I really made it. I'm the cover of the Des Moines Register, someone you should know. And I'm like, that is the pinnacle time of if someone was looking very closely at me, they would see a human being who was falling apart. And so there's a real disconnect. It's kind of smoke and mirrors on what's happening on the outside or what people see is absolutely in no way correlated to what's happening on the inside for sure, and so it was part of that level set for me of I no longer chase external things. I have an acceptance of what will come to me, and I know they don't change my life. I'm very grateful if I'm honored with something. I certainly feel grateful about that, but I don't ever outsource my identity anymore to something outside of myself, something that a circumstance could take away or something that life can take away. I no longer make that part of my identity. I really stay like my identity are the things I can control, who I am, what I stand for, the attributes I bring to the table. It's not the title I have. It's not the compensation I have. It's not the number of kids I have. None of those things. It's not the award I got. And I have a habit now of, being very grateful about those things, but not hanging awards in my office or anything like that. That's just, I don't want that to become tied to some part of the value I think I bring to the table. And those were all some things I kind of had to throw the apple cart, or tip the apple cart over or whatever in 2020 to start experiencing some of that. I fear that if life had just continued on that trajectory, that would have been a hard lesson for me to learn. And it completely changed my life,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally get it. I think it's also interesting that your measuring stick has changed. So what is your measuring stick for success now that it's not the accolades, the who you are to other people? Like what is your measuring stick for you having a life that you feel is successful or that will give you contentment?
Mm-hmm. I try now to never tie success to achieving a goal. I think goals can be great, aspirational. They can help point us a direction. But to me, success is like, did I maximize my opportunities and my growth along the path, period. So like a really simple example would be like, okay, let's say someone had a goal to lose 10 pounds by XYZ date. And if all of a sudden you went to the gym every day and you were eating healthier and you felt great and you looked great and you get to your deadline and maybe you've lost 7 pounds, to me, that's no longer like success or failure. There's no shame in that. It's an incredible achievement to be like, oh my gosh, I changed my life by going to this gym and meeting all these incredible people and eating all these healthy foods and feeling great. And so I no longer tie it to the outcome. It's about, did I maximize the journey along the way and trying to be really content every single day with what that journey looks like. So for me, that's a really, really big one. And, we count so many things in life. And if you think success is tied to a number, your compensation or your retirement or your kids or your awards, versus like, how many people could I call if I was in crisis right now? Do I have at least 3 people who would pick up the phone and know me and genuinely connect with me? And if not, that's the work to do in life. Like forget chasing all the paper, the mortgages and then the money, like chase the people that will answer the phone, invest your time there. And I didn't have that perspective before. Mm-hmm. And I would have said that I am like a humble, kind, well-rounded person, even before 2020. It's not like I was like this greedy, money hungry, just seeking fame kind of person. Even as just like this average, humble person, I still had so much work to do to really think about how do I genuinely connect with others. To me, real success is that, having those people that I can count on and they can count on me. No matter what else happens in life, those are the things I have.
I love it.
Yeah.
There's so much value too in the network because, like you said, if the worst comes to worst, like you need a job tomorrow, you call it, hey, like everyone that I know, like you said, the last 10 years of my life or 20 years of my life, like you're leaving people with an impression of you, and if you burn bridges every time you get a chance, no one's going to come help you, and you're in a hard situation for anything, marriage issues or career issues or anything,
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a big learning piece. Let's take a break from this. We'll do the lightning round here. These are random questions we haven't told you about. Okay. There's some that are in your wheelhouse, a couple random ones just to keep you on your toes. First question, how many flavors of Girl Scout cookies are there?
There are currently 9 SKUs, 9 flavors of Girl Scout cookies. There are 8 traditional and 1 gluten-free.
Okay. What's your favorite flavor personally?
I would say today. It can change by the day because I do get to eat a lot of Girl Scout cookies. Today, my favorite one is probably the Adventureful, which is a brownie caramel sort of mashup with a little sea salt. Yeah.
Never had it. Gonna have to try it. Mine's Caramel Delights. Is that what they're called now? They were, what was it? Samoa's, yes. And then that was like my favorite growing up. I put them in ice cream and stuff. Yes. Such a good flavor.
I would say if I'm going old school, that's my other favorite for sure.
Sure. Yeah. Everyone I knew likes the not the Thin Mints, but then also the yellow ones that are like a square. What are they called now?
Lemonades is one. Okay. So there's 2 bakers that bake all the Girl Scout cookies in the country, and they do sell. So Samoa's are still around. It's just half of the country eats Samoa's from this baker. The other half of the country eats Caramel Delights from this baker. Sure. So there's lemonades and lemon ups. Those are the lemon cookies, and it depends where you're at in the country, which one you eat.
Super cool. Yeah. Super cool. What is you've mentioned you've started doing professional speaking. Mm-hmm. What is the biggest stage you've spoken on, and how many people were there?
Probably the biggest is I spoke at around 1,000 people. There's probably been a few different events that have that number. The Walmart Women's Empowerment Summit had about 1,000 people in the room. That was really incredible when they invited me to come speak at that. I would say one of my favorites ever was the National Institute of Health had reached out, and they were doing a panel about removing barriers for women in the workplace. And that was it was the National Academy of Sciences under their umbrella in Washington, D.C. And there were some astronauts and things on the panel. And I was like, how did they get my name and number? This is awesome. So that was really cool to get to be part of.
Love it. Love it. Yeah, I did a speech once in Dallas for a fitness convention for gym owners. There's 300 people there. And I was like, well, this is a lot of people. And then they're like live streaming it. But they're like, yeah, it's live streaming in Central America. There's like 400 people watching at home. Like, how many? Like, oh no, like a translator telling me like, oh, these Brazilian people are asking questions.
And that's incredible.
I'm like, don't tell me how many people are watching because I'm going to start freaking out. Like there's too many. So,
well, we share, we were both alumni of Simpson College, and last year I was floored and honored that they invited me to give the commencement speech. And so there probably were, probably more than that in the room at that time. So that's another one that was just a tremendous honor. When I think about commencement speakers, I'm not the vision of what I imagine those typically are. So I kind of had a great conversation with the president of Simpson, and I was like, so you know that like I might have a mohawk, right? Or like I might have my hair might be dyed pink, and then I talk about topics that are. And he's like, yep, no, we want you. I'm like, okay. Sure. So I just felt really honored, to be in a space like that feels sort of, academia is, there's like some sacred things that are part of that. So that one felt really special for sure, especially as an, alumni getting to kind of go back and be part of that. My daughter last year was a freshman at Simpson, so she came and watched me. She sat in the very back of this huge auditorium and just kind of snuck in the back to watch me give that speech. And that was a pretty special moment,
I love it. Yeah, we've had Jay on the podcast. He was a connection of mine. It's one of my old bosses. I used to intern at the partnership when he was the CEO there. And yeah, it's interesting. Like, he was saying all the different things they go to and whatever. And I was thinking of like celebrities, like you see like Matthew McConaughey or Jim Carrey or somebody give a speech at their alma mater. And it's always interesting. I know because after my 5 year, when I'd been out for 5 years, I did a 5-year class come back. They had like the success group. We had like 3 people, and I was asked. One of them was like a really successful actuary at Athene. Another one was in Wellmark doing some good stuff in marketing. And then they asked me to come, and I'm like, again, like you feel like a complete poser
like
up there,
right? Like I don't think I belong in this group.
Yeah. It's a weird thing. It's a humbling thing, but you're also like, somebody saw something in me. I better like get up there and say something nice to all the people that donate to the college or whatever. So it's an interesting process. Okay, so I saw you play guitar a little bit. What's your favorite campfire song to play?
Yeah. When I say I play guitar, I try to strum chords. I'm not very good at it. I only know a few chords, so I don't like play. I kind of try to play, right? So there's a Girl Scout song called On My Honor, and that I really love singing that song, and playing the chords to that. So that's my favorite.
Love it. You mentioned your service area. This is not just Iowa. There's some other different states, South Dakota being one of them. Who is the current governor of South Dakota?
Oh man, I don't know. I only overlap with, the southeast corner of South Dakota. I should know. Oh man, I lose. I fail on that one.
I had to Google it because I didn't know it.
Yeah.
It's kind of a catchy though, because the governor was Kristi Noem.
Okay.
But she just got a new job in Washington, D.C. Now she's the director of Homeland Security. Okay. So she's just been replaced like as of 2 days ago by Larry Roden. Okay. So he's the new, and anyone listening, he's the new governor of South Dakota. So
okay. I could have picked her out of a lineup if I had seen pictures, but I don't think I could have come up with her name. So there we go.
Sure.
Okay.
Now you know.
That's fair.
The last question of the lightning round, if you're having a bad day, what's kind of your go-to thing to get you out of a bad down day mood? What's your go-to thing for that?
A couple things. Number one, music. I've got my favorite playlists, and I love to just listen to some great, happy music. There's a band called the 502s that they dub themselves the happiest band on earth. Okay. And so I really love the 502s or some music like that. I love to get a good workout in. I have really come to realize that I get that high, that dopamine hit from a couple different things in life, like music, but like working out. So getting just a really hard workout in is good for me. And probably one of the third things is I love to take a good bath. I know that's like a really cliche self-care answer, but I've really started to carve out time. I've noticed it's really good for me and my brain to separate and have a little bit of quiet time. I don't have any technology on except for music, and just getting a little bit of time to sort of shut down a little bit. And I really carve that out. It might be like at 5 or 6 when I get home at night. It's not always at the very end of the day. I just try to sneak it in where I can. But those are a couple things.
Sure. I love it. Any other, we're done with the lightning round, but I'm just curious, any other health things that you're on? I know big things right now are like cold plunge, saunas, red light therapy, anything like that you're dabbling in, or is it just the workouts? Yeah, I would say I'm always, like everything else in my life that's not linear, my health and wellness isn't linear. So I'm always dabbling. I love that, dabbling. I'm on year 5 of intermittent fasting. It's been great for my life. It's really hard to know. Nutritionists and health experts are all over the board on what they recommend on things, but it's been a really good fit for my life. So I fast all day long every day for the most part and just have water and coffee throughout the day. So that's one thing. I've tried a little red light therapy here and there. I'm not very disciplined about like sitting still to do it. I try to do at least a 10-minute meditation every day. And I would say I have like a 70% follow through rate. So I'm doing okay, just a guided meditation, like in one of the apps, so I'm pretty good about doing that for about 10 minutes every day. I have started taking magnesium, just like a really, really basic supplements, nothing fancy or special, but I've really noticed that it affects me in a really positive way. So, I'm not an expert. There's so many supplements out there, but that's kind of a simple one that I have found really, good for me. I love it. Yeah. And for me, I'm also pretty avid exercise person, and I always just like changing my scenery every once in a while. Like you're like, oh, you go to the same gym, do the same thing. It's like this morning, my buddy and I went to a different gym, like in a different part of town. So I'm like, and I actually got up on time. Like you're like, oh, I got a new place I got to go. You're like curious, you're more alert. And then when it's nice out, I like taking the dog on a run because it's like, I'm not a big runner, but I'm like, there's something to be said about you're taking some breath of fresh air outside. You're like, oh, this is actually like nice to have an able body that can do this. Like it's, you kind of want to remind yourself of that. So
yeah, exactly. I would say a thing I incorporated in my life about 3 years ago that has been one of the most impactful things I've done for my health is incorporating resistance training. And that's not something I had done a lot of maybe since high school or college. And there's so many well-known benefits for people with resistance training, particularly women. It helps our bones and our muscles, but it's really changed my body composition. I feel stronger. I look stronger. It's remarkable to look at before and after pictures from 3 or 4 years ago. So I do it at Farrell's. They just use a bands program. They have helped make some adaptive equipment for me.
Nice.
Because before tried to do bands with one hand, I had a lot of barriers, and they came up with some solutions for me. So I would say adding resistance training in, even just dabbling, getting a little bit in, has been so good for me. And I'm a big advocate of that, especially for women.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and just also I always say you look good, feel good, but it's the confidence builder. And I always think like people's health is the best measurement of like just how they run their life. Cause you can, and it's always like a subtle thing when you first see someone, if they're in good shape, you almost immediately get a little sense of respect. Like, oh, like they take care of themselves. Like I'm sure they take care of other parts of their life, like a little more respect for someone, but also it's like very difficult to cheat it. You know, you can look rich, but you're not. You can look fancy or try to look cool or whatever socially, but you can't really fake having a healthy life. You know, it's more difficult to fake it. So
yeah, for sure. And that's one of those things I started to transform when my therapist said to me in 2020, let's create a life you don't want to escape from. That's when I really started thinking through like what intentionally could I do different? Even if it's hard, even if there's challenges, even if I feel like I don't have time or energy. And one of the things was I joined the Farrell's gym and just started showing up, every day, even when I didn't want to, and all the things. And so, that's one of the many things I started to do. And I'm like, if I had to create a life that felt better, what would it look like? Even though it didn't feel better at first. It's almost like in the book Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about like, even if you don't feel like you can do the thing, what would a person who does that thing look like? So for instance, like if someone's a marathoner, what does a marathoner look like? What kind of habits do they have? You don't have to be a marathoner, but like what habits do they have? Start with one instead, So I was like, I'm not a healthy person that feels great and has good well-being, but if I was going to be that, what would that look like? I suppose it might look like working out once a day, like fine, and I just kind of started chipping away at it. And before long, I turned into a healthy person with good well-being.
Sure. Well, and for me, that was our shift. So my wife and I have two. We have our 2.5-year-old son and then a 1-year-old daughter. She just turned 1 last week. And that was something I did change because before it was like go whenever at the gym, but it's like if I don't do it right in the morning before the kids are up, like there's clients call or last minute shoot or something, or employees need help or whatever. And I can't it's like, you just leave it up to chance where it's like, if you just have it, something that's a non-negotiable, like you just have to make sacrifices to do it. And I'm not a morning person, but I've had to become one because it's like my health's too important to me to not do it. And it's one of those things too, like that you snooze your alarm one day and then you've allowed yourself, it's the same thing with drinking. It's like with your situation, like you want so bad to be this type of person, but then you keep falling back into old habits. But it's like, once you put the line in the ground, like, okay, yesterday I stayed sober and tomorrow I'm going to stay like just one day at a time, like, or with a workout or anything, like the little, like you said, these little habits can make you into the person you want to be. You just have to like take the first step to like change it,
Yeah. What exactly James Clear says in his book is every decision you make is a vote for the person you want to become. And I try to think about that every time I have that temptation to, and of course I don't have 100% follow through rate, but when I have that temptation to miss a workout, or if I feel the urge to drink, it is that make a decision, like vote for the person you want to become and be that, and just make one, like you said, incremental change, tiny incremental change is where the magic is. It's so unrewarding in the present because it's tiny and you can't see it. It's not one serving of French fries that changes your life either way, right? It's the accumulation of the incremental impact of many days of French fries that, that changes your waistline.
Sure.
And so like, it's not very rewarding in the moment, but having that perspective of like, it's the big picture that matters. I'm going to make the vote for my future self today.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you had a year or two when you first started your role before this fallout and this reinvention of yourself. What changes have you seen about who you are now compared to who you were then, that you might not even have recognized yourself in the mirror in 2019 compared to now?
Yeah, I love that question. I have so much more perspective about what to feel stressed about and what not to feel stressed about. There's no question we have the same, headaches at work, the same challenges, the same things that could have put me in a sort of spiral in 2019 in terms of like, this is a huge deal. What are we going to do? And I just don't have the emotional sort of color commentary about that stuff now. I mean, I am so much more like, oh yeah, that is certainly a barrier. So what are our options? I don't need to like insert emotional energy toward it now.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you have the perspective of the worst things in life are thinking about losing my life, losing my health, losing that of my immediate loved ones. Anything else is like, okay, like we can manage that. It's unfortunate. It is a barrier and it will have an impact, but it doesn't need to send me into some sort of like stress spiral. So I would say outwardly, that's almost anyone I connect with or work with can probably see that difference. I also don't chase opportunities or sort of have that like, I gotta get the thing, the way I think I had in 2019. I'm much more like, let life come to me, I'm really focused on how do I feel really great today? What's it feel like to feel really good today? Sometimes people will ask the question like, what's next for you? What's next on your path when you're looking ahead? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't need to have an answer for that. It's like metaphorically, if you're on this like lazy river and it's a perfect summer day and you're floating along, don't get lost thinking about what's around the next curve. You can miss the whole point. Like you want to feel the sun on your skin. You want to be right there with who you're with, experiencing that. And I try to use that in life now, of course, be wise, like put some money in retirement. It's a good idea, but I don't need to know what's around the next corner because then you miss the point, which is like right now. So that's a completely different outlook than I had in 2019.
That's so profound and worth focusing on too, because I'm a huge goals guy. And I was just talking with my buddy this morning who's not, and he's like, what are your goals for this year? And I literally memorized them like these 5 things.
Yeah.
Well, why? And then I was starting to think more. We just got deeper on the why. And it's like I had this vision for what I want my business to look like in 12 months, what I want my marriage to look like in 12 months, what I want just like my reach online, like all the stuff that I do and like all these things that I want to make sure I deliver. But it got down to the reason of like, I want to make sure that I can be the person that I know I should be for the people that matter, whether it's online for everyone else, for my immediate family, for my clients, whatever, my employees, all that stuff. But it's like, that's the big thing for me that like fills my bucket is like filling other people up. Like, what can I do for other people? So I think that's really like the core of it, where I think a lot of people, if they have this like very transactional goal of like, we have to do $1 million in revenue, or we have to close so many projects, or we have to do like whatever their like big goal is. I think it, like you said, once you get that trophy, you're going to be really empty. But it's like, I also like part of the goal is just like enjoying the journey. I think that's a big part too, is like, as you're going along, you're not stressed about, oh, I missed my goal by just a little bit or whatever. Cause I think that happened to me personally last year of like, I had a revenue goal for my business. I missed it by like $10,000. And I was like kind of great, best year ever, but just barely missed it. And I'm like, well, that kind of took the wind out of me. I was like, I should be really excited, but I'm not as excited as I would have been if I didn't have this goal. But I don't know if I would have pushed as hard to get where I was if I didn't, So it's a slippery slope for sure.
It really is. That's why I love to think about goals as a compass. Like let it point me here, but it doesn't matter what journey you're on. Imagine like, what if you reframed it mentally and we're like, how many great things did I get to experience last year because of my autonomy, because of my flexibility? How many times did I get to show up for my kids or take an extra day of vacation or whatever? Those were the real gifts you got. Even if, you ended up 10,000 short, okay. But how many moments along the way were such incredible gifts that the journey was incredible and that you benefited from? And it's like, man, that's a success that you got to do that you got to have that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I know for me, like there's things that I'll think, what if, like the other day I had a dream client of mine. I'm like, what if we just did a project with them? So I picked up the phone and just called and now we're going to do a project with them. Like it just happened. I'm like, it took me 8 years to even just do that. But I'm like, if there's anything in life, like just pick up the phone, or like, if you don't have 3 friends, like you said, if you don't have 3 friends you could call in a crisis, like start meeting people, like make an intentional effort. Like I'm going to go out once a week and go meet new people, maybe not in a social drinking scenario, but like go to a networking event or go to a church gathering or go to a sporting event or pick up pickleball at like a local, like just going to get plugged in with new people. Cause that's a priority for me this year, is to like have intentional connection with people in this circle or whatever. I feel like there's ways to move forward in life without like wandering around. Cause I feel like that's one of my biggest fears is like waking up when I'm 40 and being like, I'm not happy with anything. I want to make sure that I'm like building the life that I'm really happy with and proud of and all that stuff too. So I think that's a piece for me anyway, but it differs from your view, but I think your view is so unique and something that I think people should listen to. So,
and I know with any outlook I have comes, some privilege, and it's easier to say now that I'm, in this seat in life right now, there's no question. So I don't want to discount that, but I really do think when you can try to put most of your contentment in the bucket of things people can't take away, that is when you can really have true well-being. And people can't take away genuine connection, and they can't take away your reputation very easily, So you can always lose your wealth. There's so many ways. And think about how many tragic stories there are of people that lost their wealth and then took their own lives, or their families fell apart. And that just doesn't need to be the case. When you build an identity and a life on other things, that even if we do lose this thing, what if I did lose my business? What if I did lose my job? What if I did lose my house? I would still have the same incredible people in my life. At the end of the day, like, we're all going to someday, be on our deathbeds, and that is the stuff that's going to matter. And those are the memories we're going to have. And I'm not saying those other things don't have supplemental value here and there, but that's not the finish line to accomplish any of those things,
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I totally love that perspective. Question that I have too is, we're talking about deathbeds. Now that you've reinvented yourself in different ways, and you're the newest version of Beth 2.0 or 3.0 as years go on, what do you want written on your gravestone?
Oh man, that's such a good question. I would love some version of, she loved well. And I think that most people in my life would say that. I have a pretty small circle, but I think they would say that I loved really well, that I really did a good job of showing compassion and empathy. And that it would be a life well lived.
Sure. I love that. I love that. We talk about separating your worth from the title, the compare, like who you are for other people. I think that's really hard when, I know it's a therapist tactic of like, who are you? And like, I'm a husband. No, who are you? I'm a father. Who are you? I'm a business owner. And like, it's all like who you are for other people. How have you helped split your identity from the titles you hold in life? And how have you identified yourself as just the human that you are?
Ooh, that's a really good question. One of the ways my therapist helped frame it to me, when he would kind of put it in the third person, he said, when are you the most Beth? And what does that look like? What are you doing, and who are you with? I think trying to then maximize those times, find people that I feel the most Beth with, find activities. And that's where I really started to kind of get my compass figured out on what am I doing when I feel the most Beth, and then make a list. Well, here's 5 things that I'm doing, and I wasn't always being very intentional about recognizing that or spending my time in those areas or with those people, because we all know that feeling when you spend time with a certain individual or certain people and you walk away and it doesn't feel very bucket filling, but you can't quite identify why, or maybe you can identify why. And I think for me, that's a big part of it. To be authentically seen and accepted by another human being is just the ultimate gift. And those are the people that I can be the most Beth with. So now that I can sort of like identify those guardrails, I can find more of that or maximize the time with those people, So I think that's a big part of that journey for me.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, and as you mentioned too, you're talking to President Byers, like, hey, just so you know, like, I got some wild hair. I might say some things that might twerk some people off. How has that been for you to just live authentically, like to be you? How freeing has that been to not have to be the face of the Girl Scouts of Iowa? Like you can just be you, and in being you, it's been the best. It seems like it's been the best thing ever for you. But tell me if I'm wrong. But
yeah, I feel so fortunate and privileged that I have been. That I'm in a space in life where I'm allowed to be myself. I know that's not true for everyone. It's not true for everyone in a role like mine. And it kind of happened by accident. I was 6 months sober. This was now almost 3 years ago. I was 6 months sober. And because I'm introverted and things, I like to write sometimes more than I like to speak. So I had this notion, it's 6-month anniversary, I'm going to write about this. So I started writing about it, what it felt like to be 6 months sober, how I got there. And I didn't really have anywhere to share it or put it. And I sort of randomly, without thinking about it, I posted it on LinkedIn. Like I intentionally was like, I'm not going to put this on Facebook because those are like my neighbors and friends, these people I know. But like, no one's going to see it on LinkedIn is what I thought.
Right.
And then that post went viral, and like tens of thousands of people, and then millions of people saw this post. And I was like, oh, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube.
Sure.
Like, I didn't mean to sort of become this person that openly talked about suicidal ideation or sobriety and alcoholism. But all of a sudden I was like, oh, I didn't really think that through. And here I am. But once I let it out, it sort of then empowered me to be like, okay, well, like, now it's out, and it was so freeing. So I'm kind of glad I made that little, accident, and then it almost went viral, because then it really empowered me to be like, okay, and life is still okay. So I feel really fortunate that, my team at work, my board, no one has ever said like, hey, don't talk about that. So I'm lucky in that regard. It's still threading a little bit of a needle when you're a little bit in the public eye on, when you represent an organization or a company in any way, you still have to be a little bit cautious about those things. But I certainly feel very fortunate that I for the most part, I always try to show up authentically. Sometimes I have to use a little more discernment on how much I share.
Right.
If I'm going to talk to elementary students, I'm probably not going to talk about, suicidal ideation quite as much,
Right.
So, there are things. Like, know the audience and be appropriate, but I feel so fortunate, and I would say it's one of the greatest gifts that I get to have in life. Also, a lot of times we can just choose that. We can choose, because one of the things you said earlier about like, what's keeping me from calling this company, this dream company, and then I love the question of like, why? Or what would happen? So like, what would happen if I showed up authentically? Okay. And I play it out. Well, people might think I'm weird. They might not like me. I might not fit in. Okay. And then what would happen? Well, then they might not invite me back. Okay. Then what would happen? Well, then I would have more time at home to do the things I like. And then it's like, oh, okay. Is that the worst case scenario? In that case, like, do it.
Yeah.
So like, once we kind of play out our fears and what might happen, it really, you can almost like sometimes coach yourself through these moments of what's keeping me from showing up authentically. Now, there are legitimate reasons people might not be able to show up authentically. So I'm not discounting that, but reasonably, if you can, then sometimes it's about making that choice.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I love it. And it's always the, like, what's the worst that could happen? Does it, like you just said, that scenario. And when we were in college, I've been with my wife for 13 years. So we've been together all through college and everything. And all my buddies are single at the bar. And, I want to go talk to this girl, but I'm too scared. I'm like, what's the worst thing? Like, just go talk to her. And he's like, well, if she could, blow me off. I'm like, then you come stand right back here and you're exactly where you started.
Yeah.
Or apply for that job. And what's the worst that's going to happen? Well, they deny the application. Oh, well, great. Then we'll come talk about this tomorrow in the same exact spot. So it's a challenge for that too. Another question I had here was, what have you learned now that you've been you're out of the tubes out of the toothpaste, as you said, or the toothpaste out of the tube, as you said? What have you learned about yourself from sharing openly with the public? Like, what's been their response? What's been like the things you probably didn't foresee coming when you put that post on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I couldn't believe how much traction it got. And so the post was about, suicidal ideation and, removing alcohol from my life. I couldn't believe how much traction it got and how many comments, but even more so than the comments is how many private messages. So here's what I realized. This topic resonates with so many people. This topic of feeling alone, feeling lost, feeling hopeless, struggling with something, feeling like there's no other way out, feeling unhappy. And I just was shocked at how many people, like I was sort of carrying some like embarrassment and shame. Like I've been fortunate to have this good life. How dare I think about that I wouldn't want to be here anymore? Like I was carrying that embarrassment and come to realize so many people were feeling that. And also it's still really in the shadows, even now in so many ways, because the number of people on some things I post about, you have those people that will just cheer you on in the comments, which is amazing. But when I tend to talk about suicide or alcoholism, it's in the private DMs, right? So there's still this like they're not quite comfortable. There's so many people in our community, executives and leaders and people in the public eye who still don't want to talk about that stuff publicly, which I understand. But to me, that's been the resounding aha, that there's so many people struggling with this. And when you're vulnerable about that publicly, they see you as a safe space, like, oh my gosh, like she's one of us. She understands that this thing is hard,
Mm-hmm. No, I love it. And I think especially we shoot so many different pieces for companies and everyone wants to put this picture perfect version of what the company is at all the time. And I'm always encouraging people. I'm like, you would connect way more with your target audience if you were just authentic. And who are you actually? Like, if you're a bunch of quirky, like computer nerds, like lean into it. Like, or if you're loudmouth, like crazy rocker people, like lean into it. Like whatever's you, lean into it. And I think people anymore now, especially after COVID and all the stuff like that you always do the Zoom calls with the executive and they stand up, they got their underwear on and like the stuff like that, where it's like, you're trying so hard to put out this perfect persona, but you're just a normal person.
Yeah.
I think you build so much more resoundment with people, and they like, then
trust.
Yeah. They just instantly trust you, and your walls come down. And I've met so many people that just live that. They're just, if they're authentic or they swear, they just do it. Like that's just what they are. Or they like have tattoos, or they have weird hobbies, or they dress interestingly. Like immediately you can spot them a mile away, because they're like, oh, they're just being themselves. They don't care what other people think. And I think there's so much freedom in that, because then you start attracting people that are like letting their hair out, and they're like, yeah, like F this and F that. They're just like, we're just going to be ourselves now. So I think that's really where the world's going, is just like being authentic. Like, who are you actually,
Yeah. I think after that post went viral and the toothpaste came out of the tube, I no longer had to carry the weight of like, what's this person's perception of me? It got so shattered so quickly that it became so freeing to be like, what if I didn't have to carry this weight of how people perceive me, and I could just be? And so it doesn't matter if I wear a hoodie to work. I mean, people know that I didn't even want to be alive and that I drank too much alcohol. So based from that scale, if I wear a hoodie to work or I don't look nice on a Zoom call, like on the grand scheme of things, like that's really minor. But that was such a great perspective. Like, what a gift that I get to have that perspective now. Who cares if I don't look like a 10 at work, or if I, like whatever the thing is, right? Like, okay, in the grand scheme of all of that, it became so freeing. And if we just let go a little bit of how others perceive us, and show up and just be, and like also try to be like really kind and great in that lane, But I didn't anticipate that would be the outcome, and it's so freeing.
Sure. So we're on the other end of that like downward spiral now. We're coming to current day. Are how many days, weeks, months, years sober have you been from alcohol so far?
Yeah, about 3 years and 4 months.
Congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
Super exciting.
So I still love to write about it. I have deep feelings, especially on my sober anniversaries. So I still write about it and post about it. I don't think about it every single day the way I used to now, but I never take it for granted. I still try to really actively do all of the things I need to do to, kind of stay on the road and maintain my mental wellness. Yeah.
Sure.
I feel really proud. It was really challenging for me to get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
On the other side too, you'd mentioned the suicide ideation being kind of what got you to that point where you're talking to your therapist and moving through this. For people that are also struggling with stuff like that, what are some things that helped you along your journey for you to get the help that you needed to realize that there is a reason to still be here and that you have so much to give back to the world?
Yeah. Of course, I'm not an expert or a therapist. I only have my own lived journey, and I didn't have chronic depression. I had never been diagnosed with depression. So I know there's a wide range of people that bring things to the table. What I had is really difficult circumstances in life that caused me to feel hopeless. That's what I had, right? So to feel chronically hopeless. So I think my advice in people that feel something similar with those kind of circumstances is that there is hope, and there's so many things we can change, even if they are hard. Because I would say to my therapist, I can't do that. He would say, for instance, like, maybe it's removing alcohol from my life. Maybe it's changing a job in life. And I'd be like, I can't. And the answer is, you can. You're choosing not to, because it will what? It'll be hard. It'll be hurtful. It'll be sad. Okay. But you can do it. So like, change your language, first of all. You can do it. You're choosing not to. I could work out every day. I'm choosing not to because it's expensive. I don't have daycare, whatever, insert reason. I could work out every day. It would be challenging because I would need to change my budget, change my schedule. So like that mental reframe, I told myself so many times, I can't do this. I can't watch 3 kids and have a job and work out. Like, that's good for those people that can, but I can't do that. And just the mental reframe of, I can do it. Here's what the plan would need to look like, and then I can decide, can I execute that plan today? Does it make sense for my life today? Do I want to make those sacrifices today? But that language gets us out of the hopelessness. Like, life isn't just happening to me. I'm happening to life. I have a choice. Here's the path forward. Here's all the paths forward. I think about it now when hard things happen. I have 3 choices. Number 1, can I just get over it? If we actually identify what's bothering us, a lot of times there's things we can just get over, especially if we get our ego out of the way. This person said this thing to me. This person didn't respect me. This person stepped on my toes. This person didn't meet this deadline. Okay, well, I can just get over that. Yep. If I can't get over it, can I remove myself? Maybe it's from a relationship. Maybe it's from a job. Maybe it's from a bad habit. If you can't get over it and you can't remove yourself, then you got to look at what are the solutions? What are the workarounds? What are the options? Those are your 3 choices. So I kind of fast forward to those 3 choices now when I encounter hard things, and that to me, that's really helpful because it's the opposite of hopeless. I have all the hope in the world. I have a hope. I got picked one of 3 choices. Like I have the autonomy to pick something. And for me, it's a huge mental reframe.
I love that. Love it. We talk about some of the empowering the youth, especially the female youth. And you speak on this at a lot of different events. What's one characteristic that every young woman needs to be successful?
Self-worth, a love for self, period. And unfortunately, there's a lot of outside circumstances that happen in people's lives that lead to them not having self-worth, And so when we can have self-esteem, and we get it in so many ways, it can be by having a loving, protective adult in your life. It doesn't have to be a parent or caregiver. If you know anything about like ACEs and ACE scores, like adverse childhood experiences, the more ACEs you have in your life, the less likely you are to have self-love, right? The more likely you are to have bad outcomes or problematic outcomes. So, but one of the antidotes to that is great connection with other people. And when their kids are little, they don't have a lot of say in who they're connected to. But as adults, we can help them with that, making sure they have a loving adult in their lives, getting them off of technology, at least for a while. I'm not an expert. I'm not going to come out and say like, no screens for kids, because like I'm a busy parent. We have screens in my house. But man, if you can just give some dedicated time and attention to kids when you're both off of the screen, they thrive so much and it's so good for their brains. And then getting them connected to other kids. If you can teach kids one thing from a young age, teach them how to connect with other human beings. That is the skill that will keep them happiest, keep them most fulfilled, and give them the healthiest life and the best chance at meaningful work and a job. When we put so much pressure on kids to have a certain grade point average, a certain ACT score, those are not the attributes, those are not the things that tie to what is going to give them a meaningful and fulfilled life. They're just as likely to end up, frustrated and, or in these situations. Like very successful, highly compensated people end up with suicidal ideation as well. It's how do we teach kids to build meaningful relationships?
Oh, I absolutely love it. And I think there's definitely something to be said about the screen time stuff and just unplugging and plugging in with humans, like social time, and everyone that says, oh, I'm just an introvert. It's like, yes, but introverts still like spending time with people just in different ways. They might not want to be up on a stage with a microphone and 1,000 people watching them, but they still want to go to an event or be with family. Like there's other things that come with it. So I love that. Yeah. The last question I have for you is, if someone else is feeling stuck in their life, they're at some of these, like they're hearing some of your challenges you faced and they're like, I'm in a similar situation, but slightly different or something different like that. How would you tell somebody to feel unstuck with their current reality and feel empowered that they can make a change and life's not just happening to them, but they can make it a change that could change their outcome?
I love the idea of reframing what it is we think we're looking for. So if someone is like, well, I can't leave this job because, and then like play it out, like what would happen? Well, I can't because I would have to take this pay cut, or because my commute would then be this and my childcare doesn't support that, or I would lose my health insurance and I need it for this. Okay, well, you can, right? You just have to solve for that thing. So I really like the idea we can get so stuck in the narrative of, we've all had that friend, right? Who's feels stuck. And then they sort of like spiral and complain about the same thing, right? Maybe it's the same relationship or same job for years even. And we're like, why don't they just choose? Like, it's so obvious from the outside. Like we really internally have so much choice in like, actually just choose it different. What if you did? Okay. What if you did make less money? Okay. What if you did have to change your childcare? Okay. And I'm not trying to oversimplify it. Maybe it's something smaller. What if you did drink more water every day? What if you did go up and go for a walk every morning? Whatever the thing is. I tend to think about it in terms of work and jobs and things, but there's so many things we do have the power to do. And sometimes it just takes that bold courage to just take the first step and not look at the huge outcome. But like, I really like that. Like, what's one choice you could make every day for your future self? And even if it's really small, Fundamentally, I don't know if you saw I think it was like a documentary on Netflix called Stutz, and he's a therapist or a psychologist, one of the two, and had these sort of great life lessons. But he's like, when all that feels overwhelming and it feels too big and you can't do anything else, just fundamentally start with your physical well-being, eat some good food, remove toxic substances, and get some movement. So Tolstoy had a quote, something along the lines of, people do all sorts of clever and difficult things, to get through life rather than doing the simplest, easiest things. Like, they refuse to remove the things that make life bad. It was some version of that. And I think about that now. Like, we don't, I would, at the height of my drinking and depression, I was reading books and I was working out and I was a CEO and volunteering for my kids' stuff. I kept trying to add in the things that would like make life better instead of removing the things that were making my life bad. And because those felt like the hardest things, the biggest fundamental blocks. And so just kind of reminding people, you can't just add or add what you think looks good on paper. Is there something in there that if you regularly are getting feedback from your inner circle that this thing isn't bad for you, there might be a time where you have to be like, maybe I should remove that, even if it's really hard, No,
I love it.
Yeah.
And there's a guy I follow on TikTok. He does health and fitness content. He always says it's simple, but it's not easy. Mm-hmm. It's like doing the thing that you need to, or taking the thing out that you need to. Mm-hmm. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy all the time to do. So it's definitely a unique perspective and one that I think everybody can take away as just like, what's one thing that I can add or subtract that's going to make my life dramatically better, and it's like most people already know what it is. They're just hanging on to something based on fear, like you said. And we've seen it so many times, people can reinvent themselves. They lose all their money or something bad happens with a relationship. Like, it forces you to adapt and change who you are and realize who you actually are inside, but without all those material things. So
yeah, I heard a statement the other day. I don't have the data to back it up, but what it said is the people who end up at the end of their lives who are the happiest are the people that were the most flexible, the people that could adapt most quickly to like what is. And I find that rings really true, for me, rather than getting really married to a set way it has to be or a set outcome or a set goal, being really flexible with like, okay, yeah, we can roll with this. Mm-hmm. And I think to your point, when you lose it all, maybe you lose a job or you lose a title or you lose a spouse or, someone dies or you think about changing your career. That doesn't have to be the end of your life as you know it. It is now like the seed of the next chapter. And when you can be flexible and be like, okay, it's hard, it's unfortunate, didn't really pick this, but here we are. And really leaning into that, to me, that creates a really meaningful life, No,
I love it.
Yeah.
Beth, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. You're doing some speaking, some other things. Where can people find you? Where can people connect with you and learn more about your story?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. When I am contributing to the community at different speaking events, it's just bethshelton.com. And of course, anything related to youth and Girl Scouts and women's empowerment is girlscoutsiowa.org.
Fantastic. Well, Beth, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure in your future, there's got to be a book coming at some point. So when that comes on, we'll have to have you back on for a second.
All right. I appreciate it. That's a goal without a deadline. So that's on that bucket of goals that like, I just keep writing. What's a person who has a book look like? They just write. So that's what I'm doing without a blueprint.
No, I totally love it. Yeah. If you guys have made it this far on the show, you guys know what to do. Make sure to subscribe if you're on Spotify or YouTube. Check us out on social media for clips from all the other episodes. And make sure to check out Beth's info in the details below. For the next episode, my name is Ryan Snaadt. It rhymes a lot, and I'm out. Peace.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching yet another episode of the Rhymes with the Odd podcast. We really do appreciate your support. If you could give us a 5-star review on Apple iTunes, that makes a world of difference, guys. Also, if you're tuning in on YouTube or Spotify, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss another episode, and check us out on social media. Also, if you'd like to inquire more about our services here at Snaadt Media Group or learn about doing your own podcast for your own business, you can find us at snaadmedia.com. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace.